I'm very happy to invite our first speaker, Reem Fadda, who is currently in Ramallah and has had a wonderful transition. She was formerly Associate Curator, Middle Eastern Art for the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project from 2010 until 16. Between 2005 and 7, she was director of the Palestinian Association for Contemporary Art and worked as academic director to the International Academy of Art, which she helped found in 2006. She was appointed as curator for the National Pavilion of the UAE, as I mentioned, in 2012, and was recently the curator of the 6th Marrakesh Biennial, which she will discuss with us today. Reem is going to be curating the inaugural exhibition of the Palestinian Museum in Ramallah, which opens September 1, and was awarded this year the 8th Walter Hopps Award for Curatorial Achievement by the Mellon Collection. Welcome, Reem.
Thank you. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this wonderful introduction, Natasha, and thank you, Experimenter, for this invitation. I'm always happy to come back to India, and it's my first visit to Calcutta, so I feel very privileged. I think of this as although I have 30 days to the opening of my exhibition in Ramallah, so I'm all nerves, but I feel this is always a good opportunity to kind of stop, think, reevaluate even throughout the process, and I'm very grateful that you're here being my sounding board to a lot of my ideas, which I hope you can I always expect this from a good Indian audience to completely shatter me into pieces. I really like that, I have to say. You can't say that you're not prepared. This kind of presentation is going back to talking about my experience generally, and very specifically into two projects. I've decided I'm going to focus on the Marrakesh Biennial, and then also discuss with you the exhibition in Palestine. And I think they're very connected. As Natasha has mentioned kindly, I was working previously as a curator for the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi collection that was really mostly about strategic thinking on building a collection. So I was cooped up in an office for 7 years, researching the art history of North Africa, West Asia, and South Asia. That's all I did. I read books, I spoke to artists, I did Skype meetings, I went to studios, and I just was a depository it was kind of my prolonged PhD thesis that never manifested. It's somewhere in a storage, which I can't declare where it is, but it's basically a collection somewhere in a storage out there for the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. Hopefully one day we'll all see it in its true glory. And then I had to burst. I was invited to do the Marrakesh Biennial, and it was a great experience for me to suddenly think out of that box, think out of the office museum. But I'm very grateful for the museum experience, because what I wanted to say is that, and this is something we were briefly starting to discuss this, Natasha, what I think the museum experience really gives is that there's a lot of rigor. And there is one thing that is so important for any museum personnel, and it's your relationship to the person, your relationship to the audience. And I feel that that is something we take for granted sometimes in the art world. And we really need to kind of go back and understand what that means. This is something that I think really goes through in my practice generally, and I'm very grateful for my time at the museum, at the Guggenheim, for really giving me that. And of course, the specifics of being a Palestinian, having lived before that for nearly 13 years in Ramallah, worked with several institutions, helped found these several institutions. So it's a very combined, and I want to say, it's a very combined experience, very different. I land in Marrakesh. I have a year to prepare a biennial. I have studied the art history of Morocco deeply. I know it, but I've never been, so it was my first visit. I go there and I decide I'm gonna live as long as I can in the city. I spent at least consecutively 6 months. That's not to count the other visits. And I really engrossed myself in the society and really thinking about the methodology of things. And because I can go on forever and then I'll come, and then suddenly I don't have time to show you the presentation, I've decided, no, I'll be brief in some of my ideas on the more conceptual front, and then we'll walk through the images and maybe I can talk about things in more depth. There were some key ideas that I wanted to represent in this exhibition. I wanted this to be an independent frontier, art historically speaking, to represent the voice of West Asia and North Africa and the third world, that, like the global south, really. I wanted that to be the place where it can show, shine, and represent all of its ideas, all of the various things. It was very, very clear to me when I arrived at Marrakesh, having lived 8 years in New York City, that the most precious thing that I started to understand that I owned was my time. I became able to live. So that was, and what do I mean by that? I mean, what becomes really kind of convoluted in our understanding of modernity is that you, as a material being, you don't own your time. It's like as if you're chasing time. And this is something that I thought about it in relation. Time became very important here for me. What do I mean by that? And this is where the title is really kind of crucial. I said, not new now. And this concept of new is this idea of chasing time. In modernity, it's always about thinking in the future. You never think about your current present. I'm simplifying things here. But it's just to say that you're in a rush to plan a future. This is what they teach you. This is your mortgages. This is your kind of thinking in advance. But do you own your current present time? That's a very, very serious question to ask ourselves about. So this obsession with the new, really, right? What is new? The new phone you want to own, the new house, the new car. It's very anchored on a material existence as well. So there's a lot of things here that become, I want to say, stereotypes. And what becomes absent is living. You live. Sometimes a lot of living aspects, they're very material, but they're ephemeral too. You eat a meal, it gets digested. You grow. How do you even evaluate that? It's a much more complex structure, and that is what I started to really want to focus on. This idea that I could live, and I owned my time, and I was present in the everyday in a place like Morocco. So this idea of really kind of, I don't want to say, but renouncing the new, focusing on the present, and talking about living, talking about people, about societies, the complex things that we take absolutely for granted. And I wanted to think about that as, let's say, I want to say it became like a equation for modernity. I'm presenting that as an equation for modernity, an ulterior equation that really wants to criticize the other modernity, which is about futurism, materiality in its complete essence, like you just want the material, you just want the future, you want the high-rise buildings, you want the big cities, you want the big roads. Okay, let's look at that. Let's talk about the model where the person is more important, his civic duties are more important, his quality of life is more important, the small towns, the old cities, what we consider maybe undeveloped. Let's really look at them and how they own their time and how do they present their living aspects. And maybe there's something to learn. Maybe there's a different modality for modernity there, and it presents itself. In this kind of ethos, I wanted to present an exhibition in Marrakesh. You can start the slides. And in fact, I chose to do that in 5 sites. I have multiple chapters, and I start with basically, chapter 1 is Living Matters. And I chose historical sites to present the artworks because obviously Morocco does not have a museum. It doesn't have Marrakesh doesn't have a museum, white walls, all of that. It doesn't exist. So where am I going to show the art? I'm going to show it where I can, and where I could was these beautiful historic buildings. Some of them are like 500, 600 years old. Some are 100-something years old. And a lot of them are museums. I mean, this is their display of museums. But interestingly enough, all these places were houses. I mean, these museums were houses, so it's the same logic. These spaces of historicity, and you can touch the walls, and you can touch the ceramics. Nothing's out of, it's all accessible to the public. It's visited, and nothing's precious in that kind of way. And that's something that was very important for me when I thought about matter and materiality in some place like Morocco. Everywhere you go in Marrakesh, everything's done by hand. What do I mean? I mean, everything it's so beautiful. Marrakesh's rooms, the halls, you can see here just from the image, the tiles, everything's cut by hand. It's not even a machine. I've seen them do it. And this is now and 1,000 years ago. The inlaid ceramics, the walls, the engravings, everything. So you're surrounded with beauty and with a place where the hand is really what made this available. Coming back to time, one of my artists, my invited artist, Khalil Rabah, was there, and he said, Marrakesh is so quiet. When you go out in the streets, there's like any city, the bustle, the motorcycles, etc. But when you're in your room or you're in the old city, in the Riyadh or anywhere, there's a quietness. And I tell him, it's the sound of this quietness is the sound of all the artisans working, basically, because this is what it means to make something by hand in a creative way, giving it back to society in a lived way, because they're not there to make it put on the walls untouched, unrelated to people and their living aspects. So I really wanted to display the artifacts in a non-museological way, in these lived spaces, presenting them to the public, and making a little bit of a tribute also to the artisans. I start with a prologue with this work by an artist who is Eric van Hove. And Eric, I consider him Moroccan or from all over the world. I actually met him more than 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago in Ramallah. He's kind of a nomad artist, but he's been living in Morocco, and he opened an atelier where he works with artisans, and they fabricate artworks as well. This is D90 model of basically the engine of the tractor, the Caterpillar tractor. And he made it with the artisans, and actually he invited Indonesian artisans as well to contribute, and they made all the pieces. It's a one-to-one display of the engine. And this is done, it's called Rachel's Tribute, because this is the same model of the tractor Caterpillar that ran over Rachel Corrie, who was an activist, a political activist in Palestine. She was in Gaza at the time. She's an American. She stood in front of the bulldozer trying to stop them from razing down a house in Gaza, and the Caterpillar just went over her and killed her. And it became a huge story, so he wanted to create something of a tribute. And this idea of also the political impulse, the social and political impulse in all of these artist works, because it's not just a matter of presenting beauty, it's also presenting a message. And this is something that's very important, I think, for, and and it's something I've been talking about for a long time. It's something that my studies at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi really allowed me to see, which is there's a language of contemporary arts that owes its relationship to civic society, to this idea for social and political impulse in the works from the third world. That's my statement. So what is contemporary arts today? The legacy of contemporary arts all over the world. It owes it to the third world, because the third world, in its modernity, in its onset in the 20s and 30s, etc., in India, in Morocco in the 50s, in Egypt in the 20s, they did the same painting, but the painting had a social and political message. Very hardcore social and political message. Completely dismissed in art history. 100 years later, now we're revisiting all of this. Completely dismissed. Why is this important? Why is this artist important? Guess what? The legacy of what we have today of contemporary arts that's so obviously politically active and socially active retains that, gets that from the global south. And that's a very important thing for us to start to recognize. The legacy of the arts today is indebted to the global south. The revisitation of modernity to all of these places is because of that. And I wanted that statement also to start to be shown. Is there a way for me to skim through my, no? Oh, okay. So let's, actually, this is a good segue. Mohammed Milehi is an artist, for example, from that art movement in the 50s in Morocco. And I presented the works in Bahia, in the Bahia Palace, and these are paintings. This is a 1970 painting, lacquer, finish. For example, Mohammed Milehi, I found out, was Rosenquist's friend in the early 60s. And he basically was studying in the US in the early 60s, was very active in Morocco previous to that, even in the late 50s. And he's one of the very important artists that created a movement. They wrote a manifesto and showed their works in the streets, showed their paintings, these precious paintings, in the streets, and left it out in a big square in Morocco, in Marrakesh, called Jami' al-Ifna. It's a huge square, outdoor square, and they put their paintings out there for everyone to see, and they call themselves the Casablanca School. And basically, most of them were coming from Casablanca at the time, the artists. And they said that they wanted their art to be seen by the people, and it's for the people. And the messages were for the people. So you're taking a look at this and you're thinking, cut out pop-up art. And that's it. Hey, no, you can't do that. This is Morocco. There's a different vocabulary. This actually emblem was done by the artist to talk about the Mediterranean, or the flame, which was in solidarity with the Palestinians. So this was a very crucial time. By the end of the 60s, the talk of the unification of North Africa to the Arab world, to Palestine, talking about the need to revolt. It's not just an abstract painting. And this is a great sample for that kind of work. Can we move on? And I wanted to also go across the Atlantic, and I went in solidarity with my African-American artists, which I still consider the global South, because there are a lot of artists historically that are completely unknown and are working in oblivion. From Noah Purifoy to Al Loving, Sam Gilliam. It was very important for me to show the depth, again, of this idea of abstraction, recycling. Look at how they even use material. Noah Purifoy, for example, wrote a manifesto in the 60s. This is during the, this is during the time where a lot of Black artists are trying to really point out their struggle in their art. And they talk about recycling as a methodology to assert themselves in relation to what was happening elsewhere, but where it's completely entrenched with a political message. He talked about all the lynchings that are happening to Black folks. And their houses were burned down. And he said, we should use the wood of the burnt houses to create structures like a phoenix. We should recycle these materials and present them as these artworks. Fascinating, and he did a huge sculptural park based on that kind of work. And I used Al Loving in this light, and actually his family, when they visited, I'm sorry I don't have a better image, but literally the walls of this Bahia palace are exactly like that. They're striped orange and blue. They look like they were just part of the place. This is uncontrolled weather. The family was completely fine with it. You know, this idea that they just exist out there, it's not about keeping them forever. It's not about the future of the works. It's something that was very important. Sam Gilliam, you can tell, look at this is the ceiling in these zalijed rooms. Can we move? Another more contemporary artist from Colombia, Oscar Murillo, presented an entire installation. There was a lot of commissions that happened in Marrakesh. A lot of artists that just came and kind of worked with the space. And here he really, you know, this idea of black painting for Oscar was very important. He works on presenting canvases with his family, and they make canvases, but this is no longer the white painting. You can step on it, you can touch it, it's eroding. There's a lot of references, historical referencing to the slave cotton trade, etc. I also invited Omar Barrada to create a sort of library and interactive space where he does a tribute to one of the leading critics, Ahmed Bouanani. This is Tariq Atwi, who also did a huge kind of commissioned work with, and he presented it in Bahia Palace. And it was looking back at the genealogy of Tarab music, but now from the North African perspective. And what Tariq does is, it's a kind of an amalgamation of sounds, and it's a lot of digital kind of intervening. But what is very important to know about even the sound, the form of tarab in Arabic music, or in a lot, even in Amazigh music, is that it responds to people. The way people, as soon as you kind of respond, the people, how they perform, you find that the musician improvises on spot. So it's like reacting to the bodies of the people. And this is something that this piece reflects. This is just to show you another display of the artworks in Palais Badir, 1600 Palais. Here you have Rashid Quraishi's jars, you have Ella Natsui's commissioned work, Radwan Mriziga in the middle did a performance. Yeah. Can we move? Yeah. Here's Rashid Quraishi. And I just want to say, I want to preface that someone like Rashid Quraishi, for example, I've known for 20-something years. When he came to Ramallah, these interconnectedness between North Africa, West Asia, and other places is very important. And again, this tribute to artisans in the works, what does that mean? And why is it dismissed in art history? So easily dismissed. The collaboration with literature, like someone like Rashid Quraishi worked with Mahmoud Darwish, the Palestinian poet, and presented a series of beautiful works referencing literature, all very politically motivated. Can we? 10? Oh God. Okay, let's just move. Radhika Kimji, Fatih Zammouri, Ahmed Mater. Yeah, Dana Awartani. This is just to give you more. Muna Hatoum presented in this space in a very different light to how we see her works. Khalil Rabah, Sandy Hilal and Alessandro Petti. Yeah. Move. Superflex did a fantastic video about called Kwasa Kwasa about refugees and their migration. Can we move? That's it, right? Shall we go? And now I have 10 minutes to speak about my show in Jerusalem. And I just want to say, going back to this, I was asked to curate a show on Jerusalem for the Palestinian Museum that inaugurated a year ago. A beautiful building. I'm sorry, I forgot to put an image of the building, but, and this building was designed by Hennigan Peng. It's on a hilltop in Birzeit, a town nearby Ramallah. It's very much camouflaged with the landscape of the hills around it. It has these beautiful landscaped gardens and a very small hall, maybe as big as the hall that we had dinner in last night. Like nothing, it's like 400 square meters. And they invited me to do a show, and they said, we want you to do it about Jerusalem because it marks the 50 years after the annexation of Jerusalem in 1967 by the Israelis. I said, let's start here. I don't do that. I will work on Jerusalem, but for my motives, not to celebrate whatever, not to talk about anything in relation to what Israel did to us. I'm not reactionary that way. That's not the point. There's a certain condition in Jerusalem that needs to be addressed. And for me, I can't go to Jerusalem. I've been working on this show for the past 10 months, and I've not been there except once, smuggled. I have no permit, no Israeli permit. There's a huge checkpoint on every corner, and I can't go. So I've been in my entire living in Palestine, maybe 10 times, 12 times to Jerusalem. Each time, interestingly enough, I went back to a review I once did on a show when I was also smuggled to see a show in Jerusalem that was done by Al Ma'amal Jerusalem show in 2006. And in my review, and having visited now, being smuggled in February, I felt that the city was dead. In my review in 2006, I actually talk about the city is dead. And that was very interesting. So for me, the first thing I had to talk about was, how do I make Jerusalem live? And this is the title of the show, Jerusalem Lives. Interestingly enough, in Arabic, it's Tahya al-Quds, which is a slogan, a political slogan. And it's completely, in my understanding, completely vacuumed. It means nothing. Tahya al-Quds, people say it in these political speeches. And I wanted to stand there for a moment and look at the title and say, how can we give that slogan a meaning? Let's just stop for one moment and think about that for an exhibition and for a show. I decided that I'm going to do it again, 4 chapters in my kind of way. And in my first chapter is in the central hall, and I wanted to present a thesis where I talk about Jerusalem as the center point. It's a complete metaphorical tangent. I decided that Jerusalem is where globalization starts and where it ends. And the failure of globalization happens in Jerusalem, and that's why it resonates for everywhere else in the world. So when we talk about terrorist attacks in France and how they deter them and how multiculturalism fails in, London or anywhere else, let's take a look at Jerusalem to understand what's happening. How they treat these ideas is where it happens in Jerusalem. This little laboratory is where it's becoming transported into everywhere else in the world. The methodologies of how they think about the cities, control, media, security, surveillance, it's happening in Jerusalem. And basically, I decided to present an exhibition in 5 parts: cultural, political, cultural meaning media and image making, how it's presented as a city, political, and then economical, ideological, and then going back to culture. I just want to, before I get caught up in time and have no time to finish, I want to talk. The second chapter is where I go from this exhibition you're going to see. It's so dense. There's so much material in this small room. And then I decided it's not enough, because it's like I'm presenting the problem to the people that live there. It's very few people that can come to Palestine and actually see this exhibition. And they know this. I mean, I'm presenting new theses as well, but still, it's bombarding them with something they know. How do I give them a way out? My second chapter is where I decided that I'm going to invite artists to come back and abstract Jerusalem. They present commissions in the gardens. These beautiful manicured gardens are where 20 works by artists, Palestinian, Arab, international, all present works in the gardens from the gallery. There's a glass gallery that leads to the gardens, and that's where I'm presenting the work, and it's about openness. So if the Israelis are working on completely, exclusively setting the city to be the capital of the Jewish state only, completely creating this deathbed, how do I present a way to say this is the answer from the Palestinian side? We're about openness. We're about land. We're about agency to people. Everyone is invited. What are the artist responses? And it's fabulous. The way artists are responding to the space in a very, I want to say, intuitive way is just absolutely amazing. And then my third chapter is where the public program, I decided I'm not doing film screenings. I'm not doing artist talks as part of my public program. Some are doing for education, but I'm not, me, Reem, I'm not curating that. I'm not doing dance, music performances, none of that. I went to 6 institutions through my conduit colleagues, and I went to these 6 institutions in Jerusalem, and I said to them, what do you want? What do you need? You've been there for years, decades, in the old city, in East Jerusalem. What do you need me to do for you so that you persevere and continue your work? Especially in face of all the closure that you're facing. And it's amazing, you know, the amount of response is very humane. We want to make a remake of a play that we did in the 80s in order, Hakawati, for example, theater. Another institution like Silwan, a society that is completely facing closure by the Israelis because Silwan is a neighborhood in Israel, in Jerusalem, in the old city, in East Jerusalem, that is completely facing Judaization, meaning Jewish settlers want to take the Palestinian homes, throw them out, and create the city of David. So and what they're doing, they do these demonstrations, they work with students, they work with artists in the city to keep it going on. So I really wanted to work with these institutions on a prolonged way. Maybe it even becomes a public program for the actual museum forever. We always partner with institutions in Jerusalem to keep them going. The last chapter is the catalog. I went to a very important, versus all the books that you see on tourism on Jerusalem, Salem, blah, blah, blah. You're going to find tons if you go on Amazon. There's one publication, it's called Jerusalem Quarterly, and it's also available in Arabic, Hawliyat al-Quds. And they've been creating, it's a quarterly, 4 issues a year, that 12 essays, studied, beautiful, historical, contemporary about Jerusalem for the past 30 years. I went to them and I said, I want to do a special edition for you in my catalog. I want it to be the spine of my catalog, because I want this idea of the knowledge production about the city to be the anchor point. And then I will create all the documentation about the other things, the central exhibition, the commissioned artists, and the institutions in Jerusalem to envelop that catalog. And Salim Tamari, brilliant anthropologist and sociologist and art and historian, he told me, I want it to be about the lives of the most important kind of people in Jerusalem. This is him and me thinking both in like same way, but coming from different parts. And he said, I want to call it Jerusalem Lives. And I said, that's where the title is, Jerusalem Lives. Let's look at the PowerPoint. So this is, in the first cultural section, I'm showing where this image of Jerusalem is the logos, the Dome of the Rock, the Dome of the Rock, the Dome of the Rock. How I even criticize how we locally present. This is a furniture shop in Jenin, in the north part of Palestine. Their emblem is the Dome of the Rock in the middle of like nowhere. And this is the Dome of the Rock by Palestinian prisoners that make these models with beads and stuff. On the cover of vinyls. We're going to show like 60 posters, images by photographers, all showing that. Espresso, the cards, Dome of the Rock. And then showing a little bit of the critical edge from the viewpoint of the artist. This image, for example, is by artist Sleiman Mansour. It's from the 70s. Every household in Palestine had a poster of this image. When it was produced as a painting, the artist went to the Communist Party where he was part of in Jerusalem, and they took the image in the 70s, and they created a print of it that became on Kleenex boxes, postcards, posters. I remember going with Sleiman in Norway in 2006 we were meeting with parliamentarians, and this parliamentarian from Norway said, "You're the man who did, the man carrying Jerusalem on his back." He's like, "Yes." He's like, "We've had the poster in our house since 1972 in Norway." So, and he's a Norwegian. This is not even a Palestinian. So this image is a very important image, but I think it's fascinating. Even people responded to that image. It's basically an old man carrying Jerusalem on his back. He doesn't want to carry it. He does not want to carry it. That critical message is really crucial. And this is what lives in the minds of people. We're carrying it, but we don't want to carry it. You know, it's that kind of real hardship. Let's move. Yeah. Yazan Khalili's work as well, responding critically to the idea of the Dome of the Rock. And now, political section, I'll probably just end at that one, but Rula Halawani here showed the wall in 2004. She's a Jerusalemite. This is at the time of the Intifada where we couldn't move. We were in curfew. I lived there. I didn't know that they were building a wall encircling everywhere in Palestine. And for me, when I saw Rula and Simone Biton's film for the very first time, I cried. I didn't realize I was being imprisoned. So this is something that, for me, it was a very important kind of thing to go back to, show how much the artist is in the pulse of the matter, showing the critical things even about what we need to pay attention to, what becomes historic later on. The amalgam, like the accumulation of all the artist's works, what does it tell us as a depository of learning? Ahad Himan, this is a commission thing. This is part of our study of what's happening in Jerusalem. We're finding out that they're building an entire ring of settlements, Israeli settlements, to enclose the entire parameter of Jerusalem and East Jerusalem, and therefore complete the annexation. So I decided we're going to do this installation to show the people that can't even access Jerusalem what it looks like. Emily Jasser did a very important work years ago about circulation, people not being able to pass through. Muna Hatoum in 1996 comes to Palestine, to Jerusalem, originally Palestinian, and what she first notices, this is after Oslo, is the settlements. She creates this soap installation where she puts the beads in red on top of it, mapping out the settlements. It looks like a cancer on the earth. Infographics were showing about Jerusalem, the discrimination policies, everything that's happening there. This is a collective called Visualizing Palestine that's producing a number of them. We're working also with another graphic designer to talk about the closures, producing PowerPoints and infographics, really talking about the systematic policies there to present all of these things. So it's not just the work of artists. I'm really showing also the work of the creative institutions and individuals to really present all these ideas. Grassroots Jerusalem is the first initiative in Palestine to map out the city from the Palestinian perspective. So basically, and this is a video from online from YouTube by the Negotiation Support Unit. We're showing the various ID structures of people in Jerusalem. A Jerusalemite has maybe 6 ways of having an ID. Because obviously, since you're not a citizen of the state, you're a sort of refugee, you're influx. Your status as a citizen is debatable considering from the Israelis. So showing that material kind of evidence. Najil Ali is a very important characterist, died in the 80s. And his characters still resonate today about these relationships to Jerusalem. And Khalid Jarrar's work on the checkpoints in 2008. Very briefly, the economic, because it's just a few slides. Sorry, this is an opportunity. Camp did a work in 2009 and 11. See, I told you it's important because it's your artist. They did a work on surveillance in Jerusalem. I really want to present in the economic section how Israel is using the military-industrial complex to promote an industry for itself. So all the applications on military, on security, becomes, marketed for the world after they try it out on the Palestinians. So for example, what's happening today in Jerusalem. You heard about the electronic gates they're trying to put in front of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and people are demonstrating. Apparently, they're putting these mobile surveillance cameras. Let's see how they're going to be in every city in the world come a couple of years. Let's note. Let's just move very quickly because it's just images. of also showing how the depravity of this situation is also, these are tax documents that show how Palestinian owners in the Old City they have to pay really high taxes to Israel, and these are not imposed on the Jewish settlers in the city. And this discrimination policy is making all the Old City die out. Shops are closing, there's no economy. This is an important, I'm sorry I don't have the proper caption. Yotam Feldman, an Israeli filmmaker, did a fabulous film. It's on YouTube. It's called The Lab, about this entire military industry. Fascinating. How Netanyahu's trying to sell off his experience building the wall to Trump. Maybe they'll do it in Mexico soon. Hamushim, an Israeli institution that's facing, there's every week a military fair in Israel. Every week. In Tel Aviv. Hamushim is just there to criticize these fairs. Let's walk. This is the surveillance room inside the Old City of Jerusalem. European delegations have been coming for the past 20 years to see how well this surveillance unit and the cameras demonstrate in the Old City. Because they're not allowed technically or legally to do this inside Europe, but they're trying to build a case in order for these things to start to be transported in various cities. Let's just move from there, quickly. Because I just want to show you the commissions in images. I'm not going to talk about them, just move. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, here we go. Bob Gramsma, let's just move. Adrian Villaroja, Nida Sonnokrot, Iman Isa. This is the rock on top of the museum by Yazan Khalili that is heavy in the morning and it glows in the night, so it feels like it's floating. Adar Jaber, deformed marble situation, and Sudarshan Shetty. Thank you. That's it. Sorry for taking so much time.
Thank you, Reem.
I always go over time. It's just bad.
But it's been, in a sense, also very synthetic to understand how the research phase, the years of research and collection building that led you to this extensive study of, as you said, of North Africa, of the Middle East, of South Asia as well, which is now clearly feeding back into the work in Morocco, in Marrakesh, as well as now the upcoming show in Ramallah. So thank you for actually charting that out for us so clearly. Perhaps to go back to some of those curatorial strategies for the Marrakesh Biennial, because there was, as far as I recall, there was not only the not new now, but there was sort of this keywords that fed into the segments of the Biennale, but also keywords for you, which included survival strategies, that included civic awareness, that included recycling, as you mentioned, in the way that artists have used that method as a kind of recuperation and with a radical stance. So if you could go through some of those and also discuss a little bit your collaborators, particularly Omar Berada and the work that he did with the library and showing of...
yeah, I mean, as I said, I did it in chapters. So every historical site was a chapter on and of its own. First one being Living Matters. The second one is, of course, now I forget everything. I'm like so overwhelmed. I mean, for me, it was all about looking at a tangent of where I want, for Palais Badia, for example, is a place for me where I didn't want to treat history in the way history is being taught. I wanted history to be the present. So, and how do you make the historical present? You make the historical present by making it accessible, making it very immediate in terms of its relation to people. And I wanted this idea of the tangible. So the recycled, the tangible, it's not anything that is the precious and away from the use of society. This was a very important kind of distinction for me. And I think actually Benjamin is someone who really kind of warned us of this in his study of modernity, the Arcades project and I like to make these things applicable from a philosophical point, but in an exhibition way. So he talked about, sorry, excuse me, how suddenly in the industrial age, you started to see the object that you did by your hand displayed in front of you. For example, they make a car. The car is something you use. You don't put it on a display. The 19th century marked that point of where they start to exhibit the work of the hand. So this is, I mean, he created that distinction to really try to pinpoint that there's this huge gap between us and our handmade object. This fetishization has started. So for example, one of the works that I wanted to show by an artist that critically talks about this is a Moroccan artist. His name is Khalil Laghrib. I'm sorry, I don't have an image. He presents objects. He's never sold. He's 65 years old, was a teacher of history and geography, and produced art all his life, conceptually. His art is about death and decay. He creates an object from bread, from any kind of material that decays and dies. And he wanted to put that, he puts them on pedestals for you to see, and they go away. And this is like one of the assumed things that really were a point for me. He never sells his work. It doesn't make sense, obviously, to sell them. And he's against that. And he is about this idea of the cycle of life, the cycle of the object. Who do you want to emphasize? The living or the dead? And if the living die, then it's a real important question. Why does the artwork have to perpetuate when you die? You know, philosophically, this is a question for all of us. Of course, we're thinking civilization, et cetera. So fascinating. I mean, where did this come from anyways? You know, this idea of material accumulation, museums, putting stuff, collecting them. So it's inherent in a lot of the ideas that I wanted to present. Decolonization was another very important kind of concept. A lot of the artists that I worked with deal with the ideas of decolonization, creating places for agency, the sovereign place for the artist to create civic and active objects. One thing I want to preface and to say is that I did not relinquish beauty by doing all of this. Aesthetic is an important thing for any artist. They're not creating a recycled object to make something ugly, no, you know, or whatever. I really wanted the artist who retained beauty, too. It's a complex political message, complex social message, but it's also extremely pleasing to the eye. Another way I sort of did this is even the book that I produced for the biennial. I created little booklets for each artist. It was like a DIY. We gave a format to every artist to fill in 8 pages. And they filled it out. We printed thousands of copies. And this is because we couldn't put wall text necessarily on the wall. We eventually did, but so people would take the booklets, and the way how much booklets they carried is basically the book. And it's available online. All of these booklets are available. It's basically an A4 folded. So if you ever wanted to publish the book, just go on the website. You'll find every single booklet on every artist, and you can own the book. So this idea of accessibility, giving it out, giving the information out to people is a very important thing that we did. In relationship to, I really worked with 3 curators, not just Omar Barrada. 2 other curators that helped me kind of chart the Casablanca School and work on bringing the artworks by these important artists from Morocco, Farid Belkahi Melihi, the one that you saw, the flame. Several curators helped me. For Omar Barrada's show particularly, Omar is a colleague and a friend I've known for many years, and I don't do anything in isolation. I always work with kind of whoever I can in terms of mobilizing the situation on the ground. And Omar, obviously, is someone who has a large standing, has worked in Marrakesh through Dar al-Ma'moon, which is a knowledge-making institution and a library. And Ahmed Bou'nani, his study on Ahmed Bou'nani is a very important study. And his relationship to the family of Bou'nani, the films, I mean, such a deep project, and giving it like its own kind of large space within the show. So it became a show within the show itself. And I think was brilliant and worked fabulously. It was an important thing, and people really reacted to it in a very unique way. We trained even young students on cataloging the works of Bou'nani's library. There was artists that responded to the works, the writings of Bou'nani, like Ito Barada, and several others. Sara Wahdu, Omar commissioned them to make works on Bou'nani. To how do you even recycle that history of knowledge by Bou'nani and making it alive today? Bou'nani is someone who really studied artisans, and he created a big kind of directory of notes and films about how artisans have a methodology in thinking about history as a place for a living history. And it perpetuates in a material way. So I think this is how it all connected in a very, I want to say, organic manner in the show.
Great. Just, since we're not entirely discussing like your work at the Guggenheim, but I did want to mention that what you did chart out was a kind of a challenging framework, which one hopes will continue, that looked at Pan-Afro-Arab relations, that looked at Afro-Asian unity, which may not, again, be the kind of framework within which a collection is built, and its social positions are also built around. So maybe if you could discuss that. And I also do, for the sake of this audience, I mean that we do know also artists who are part of Gulf labor and who have been actively resisting some of the situations around which the Abu Dhabi project is leading to. So I think to really take this chance to discuss both your own objectives and research and what you faced as part of the organization.
I mean, the collection building of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, you have to think about it in this kind of way. Where else do you know a museum that's being built from scratch, like zero? And you come and you say, here are the brilliant minds from various areas or whatever. I just called myself a brilliant mind. That's dismiss that. And just you say you bring all these people. We were 9 curators from the actual institution, and 5 that were dedicated for this project. And you can imagine the discussions. Oof. Anyways, and then they collaborate with Geeta Kapoor, Salah Hassan, Okwi, we talk to these people, we bring them as consultants and advisors. So imagine the mass thinking from scratch to build a museum that's centered in the middle of Asia, West Asia, right next to the cusp of South Asia, has deep relationships to North Africa. And you're making this from scratch there with international knowledge. I mean, I don't want to make it, I've already left the institution, I can be as critical as I want. But I have to say, it's such a unique opportunity to build a collection from that standpoint. Really unprecedented. And actually, the Afro-Asian relationships, all of that, like South Asian relationships to West Asia, how we did that, we did look at artists, we did look at specific art movements from scratch, because we're doing this from scratch. We said, let's map it out, all these beautiful art movements, all these kind of archival materials that connect all these things together. How do we start to target these artists? Sometimes we bought these one-offs, of course, they exist. Not everything's a master plan. But if you were going to tell this kind of history from the standpoint of such an institution, you have the advantage. And we did that. We were slowly building up that cartography that uniquely talks about the viewpoint of the global South, from the middle of an Asian perspective, feeding into the international one. look, we cannot dismiss what the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi as a largesse kind of project is. And what does that mean for education, for markets? I mean, of course, because of a lot of, let's say, non-disclosure kind of clauses and all, we couldn't talk about these issues for a long, long time until we kind of announced the mass of a lot of our collection. But we couldn't discuss the fact that we were doing all of this. And you would go to an art fair. I would go to Frieze or somewhere. Everything we bought was everything you saw in these booths. The change in the cartography of the market to highlight some of the missing artists, people who were not there, etc., is who the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi bought. It was a major, I want to say, it became like the arrow for where art history is starting to be directed. Of course, because it is an amalgamation of the knowledge of a lot of these curators and people who know and have studied and have been saying things. And a lot of our advisors did this for free. They were like, Gita, Salah, etc. Hey, don't call this Middle East, call this West Asia. Buy this artist, don't buy, this is the art movement you need to focus on. I mean, a lot of them really gave us this knowledge because they just wanted to see it somewhere, suddenly, starting to manifest. And it's an enabler. This place becomes an enabler. And what I hope one day it will manifest as a museum. And we'll see these collections. Because you want to go somewhere where you see this history. This art history is really important to be told in this kind of way. Concerning Gulf labor, of course, I have a relationship with all these artists and continue to respect and work with them. And, but you know what? I love artists because, as I said, even in the Jerusalem Lives show, they kind of pay attention to the thing that you're not paying attention to. Like, hey, beware. Don't build this in the wrong way. Don't build this in the wrong methodology, which we completely respect. However, artists can be idealistic. Idealistic in a means of like in a way even unreasonable. 5 years, 3 years from today, I was like sitting with a group of them. I was like, it's not even, I don't know that it's going to be built. We heard you. All the requirements for building, we're revising all of the, and there's a lot of years to do this. But let's say there became a platform of, a question I always wanted to ask and publicly ask the artists, why didn't they do this diplomatically? Why was it always a frontier of public display of, The culture in the UAE, the culture in Arab societies is one of diplomatic nature. You go to the sheikh, you tell him, we need to sit and talk. This is, you have conduits to bring people together, and things are done in a covered way, but usually in a way that is asking for favors but pay attention because it's not a public assault. I always wanted to ask the artists, why didn't they take that route? Why? Why the New York Times front page? And that is a very problematic thing. We're feeding the media that loves to feed, that loves this whole, these are the backward, third world, we need to intervene. This all kind of feeds into a methodology of saying, this is the backward world where we need to have military intervention. They don't know what's best for them. It's an image. How do we not be cautious of that and feed into the same logic? As cultural proponents, there's a bigger thing that I think they were completely oblivious to. And I was really upset at that because I'm not someone who thinks always in small kind of, let's say, gains. Don't think the battle, think the war. If I lose the war by thinking, now the UAE partners with Israel, because obviously Israel's the UAE's military savior now, right? It's an issue. You have to think about where we don't feed a logic that becomes, in the end of the more detrimental to us as a social construct. And I really wanted to think about a way for yes, I still concede it's a very important thing that they did. I think even in art historical terms, the fact that these artists were creating a collective to consciously mobilize for an institution to take a different course of action politically and socially, I think it's one of our first moments now in contemporary times and influence and achieve influence. But I always wonder at the public part.
On that note, we're going to open up to the public now
Yes.
for questions. So, okay, 3 hands.
Hit.
I would like to give the chance of questioning to those who were not asking yesterday. So there's 3 of you have all asked questions. Is there anyone else? Yeah.
There's a lot to react to in the Gulf flavor thing, but I do want to come back just to Jerusalem Lives.
Sure.
So it's interesting that you, from the start, set up conditions with a new institution to say, okay, if there's a condition that needs to really be addressed, let's take that as a starting point. And by doing that, you say that, okay, I'm not going to do a reactive show. And so my question is, what's the negotiation like with that institution? So if you take it up to the institutional level, what was their reaction to that? How did you navigate that reaction on the upstream kind of going up? And then going down, how do you gauge how successful you are in that? What does reactivity kind of look like in an exhibition, especially in such a charged subject matter, like Jerusalem again, which is a virtual, as you say, which is a virtual thing. That people they know it, but they're not there. The people who are there can't be there. So
I appreciate your question because it's something I ask myself every day. I mean, the thing for me is that, I mean, to go back to the institution, I just want to say they sent me a concept note. They said, and the title of the show. So I was like, whoa, no, it doesn't work that way. I don't work with a ready concept note and a title. Take it back. So it was a very, very, I just spoke to the director and he's like, no, it's just our artistic committee wrote this and I was like, we're gonna bin it. I take your ideas and I hear what the artistic committee wants, and I did take some of the references, so some of it still kind of exists in the show, in the spirit of the show, but they were very, like from the beginning, they were like, we're inviting you to do your thing, your concept note. I had a deadline to develop my research and my concept note and for the board to accept it. And so it was a very, I want to say, very easy process from the beginning. There's a lot of scrutiny within the actual museum because they're new. So they're developing their methodology of administrating the work, and they're still learning. But I'm enjoying it. I always find myself in these setup situations, and I always enjoy it, even when it gets tough. But they have never censored me, not once. So it's a very, like, carte blanche, do your thing. As much as I push back on everything that we can do, everything we can say, who are we representing? They really work with me. And even budgetarily, like this is a project that is sponsored by Palestinians, fully. It's a big budget. And they were like, we will get you the money. You do your thing. I mean, honestly, having left Palestine for 8 years and come back to that, it's a real joy to see that this is starting to really develop in this kind of know-how. I'm going to leave the criticisms, out because I really want to focus on the positive. And for your second question about being reactive, of course it's hard not to. I'm Palestinian. I can't cross to Jerusalem. How am I going to be how am I going to show whatever it is, not be reactive to that? It's impossible. And thank God I'm not an academic. I'm a curator. I get to be subjective and as subjective as I want. But again, I do try to go 2 steps back and look at the bigger picture. Where does Palestine even resonate? Not for the Palestinians. Where does it resonate for all of us? Do we want all our cities to be gated surveilled communities where, I'm sorry, everyone here, like, I used to pass the checkpoints, passing from Amman to Palestine is through border controls by the Israelis. Not your usual, like the guard that checks your papers and you pass through. No. We used to spend 12 hours at the border control. They stripped us. They put metal detectors. Imagine you with your sisters and your mother naked, being shoved with metal detectors, in every crevice in your body to be checked for metals, and your children. This is what I grew up with. And then, take off your shoes, no liquids. This is 86. This is not 2011. And airports. You know that Israelis man most airports now in the world? Frankfurt Airport is manned by Israeli personnel. This is the reality that everybody's accepted in what was happening in Jerusalem, in what was happening in Palestine. Here you go. Congratulations. You've turned the blind eye here, take it. Enjoy it. This is what we're going to be facing in every global city. Is a bomb in a mall really worth that we have to live in completely surveilled? You can't mobily walk anywhere without having guards or people, and it's private security agencies here, military men there, and everything's normalized? Is that also okay? Is logics of entire communities and cities that start to wage war because of terror, are these questions really okay? Are these the priorities we want to live our lives for? So I'm trying to look at it from that kind of perspective. You see a microcosm with Jerusalem, but it's asking the deeper questions. And it's a real thing. I hope it's not going to be reactive in that way. And I hope it's not going to be myopic. And I hope it can be understood in a larger way and a framework.
Any other questions? Sure. Sky?
Hi. Actually, our questions are linked, so I'll just start. I just want to go back to something you said about renouncing the new as being like a formula for modernity. And that's interesting, but maybe it also links up to the fact that how maybe categories such as the Global South seem to maybe disallow what a center that's a North American European center deems as the peripheries, to have like kind of types of modernities that aren't just maybe historically isolated, that are very entangled in a global modernism. So this idea that like global modernity is being accessed by the peripheries in the same way that it's being accessed by the center, and so these works are not standing out in the type of isolation. You know, they're all together in the same narrative, same dialogue. Yeah. Which maybe leads up to Mario's question, which I think is a little bit different to how do we decolonize the practice of curation?
Sure.
And at the same time, how do we curate decolonialism?
Sure.
You know, because the idea of the new world,
yeah,
and the idea of freedom in the 50s and 60s, and then the promised land. I think Superflex with Kwasa is really talking about that, where instead of crossing the Mediterranean, you have people who are moving to the farthermost outpost of Mayotte.
Yes.
You know? So the idea of what is the promised land, and thereby, when you're showing works right up from Alessandro and Sandy Hilal, you know, camp, I'm very interested in how you speculate the idea of curating decolonialism, and at the same time, how do we decolonize curation?
Sure. Nice. Whoa. Can you write those? No, I'm joking. I'll make that into a lecture on it. To answer your question, I want to say that it's interesting, but I kind of forgot what your initial question, but I remember my answer. The Guggenheim Abu Dhabi is an answer to this idea of manifesting that intersection of the Global South with the international, because it's a museum for contemporary knowledge. I mean, what you were asking me is basically these intertangled modernities have always existed. They continue to exist. They continue to be influential. Great. Where do you see that? I'll hit you back with a question. Where do you see that? Where? In biennials that finish after 2 months? Like where do you go to see that forever? You can go and visit and see that again and again and again, and it continues to be there forever. The Guggenheim Abu Dhabi would have been that place where you can visit students, teachers, visitors for not 1, 2 months, 3 months, decades, whatever, like the Louvre. And you go and you see that perspective forever. That does not exist yet. Those intertangled modernisms that we were like, they've always existed. We were always there. They're not the charted and told narrative anywhere in an institutional format. They're not. They're completely ephemeral narratives. They're not archived to an extent where they become the manifest mainstream. They happen as exhibitions once upon a time in the Tate, like for 2 months. That catalog is produced, great. 60 years, we forget. 20, 30 years, it's forgotten. That's what happened to the Museum of Modern Art. They collected extensively from all over the world, Iranian art, blah, 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 in the 60s. They just forgot to do that for 50 years. They're just going back now to the coffers to present it because, ooh, oh my God, the ban. No, we've always loved Iranians and we've had them since 50 years. Okay, great. Not one show. For that master artist, you've had a work that's worth now millions and it's in your collection. Not once was it displayed in your permanent collection. Why? So this is where institutionalization of these narratives is absolutely critical and essential. I went 4 years ago to the Tate, no, 5 years ago to the Tate. And I went to their, these young ladies that have the list of names of artists in the collection. If you're searching for an artist, they can tell you where it's located. And I looked at the entire list, 2 Arab artists, 2, not one South Asian artist, not one from North Africa, not one. 2 recent purchases because I know when they buy their work. So imagine. And this is Tate Modern. This is London. London is owned by Arabs. Sorry, let's cut the crap. London is now owned by Arabs. Go to the Kensington, go to anywhere. Who's the money? Tate Modern doesn't have except 2 artists? How's that acceptable? How is that acceptable? We were talking about this about the Bahnhof in Berlin. They had Gulsun Kara Mustafa in the Bahnhof for an exhibition. Not one Turkish person knew about this, who I ever spoke to, didn't know about this show. The disconnectedness is just insane too. And these exhibitions are not the format. You want education, school visits, the real tough work. You don't do it with the small shows that you put on in museums. You don't get them to go to the paid shows, for the school children. You send them to the collections, the things that are for free. So let's start to think about these methodologies in a much more scrutinized way, because this is a very rigorous process between studying the works, finding the works, buying the works, presenting the works, educationally, how do you do it? You also conserve, there's so much to revere this piece and present it in an institutionalized format. Let's not dismiss that. Coming back to you, on decolonizing curating, and then, also at the same time, thinking about decolonization in practice. And for me, that's really essential. For example, decolonizing curating on a museum format is what I've been doing in terms of thinking, charting about methodologies of knowledge from a very different angle. So thinking critically to the mainstream narrative and then providing all this knowledge to seep into the mainstream on all formats. Market, galleries, dealers, collectors, patrons, everyone has a role. I always consider myself, I always say, I'm not a leader, I'm a lobbyist. I sit there and I lobby. go buy Ibrahim Salahi now. You know, I've said that like maybe 100 times to people. Now he's worth millions, no one can buy him. And basically, like, how do you start to really build everything in a way from the museum? You start even from the museum. You think that this is the most institutional format that's completely colonial. No, 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 no. Everything is, you can insert yourself anywhere. On curating methodologies as well, like for me, this idea of the non-white space, the touching art, this is like another frontier. Art that is not conserved is another frontier. I don't want art to be conserved forever. You know, I really don't. It has a lifetime. There are things that can live. But you know, also let's be reasonable. People die. People die. Really, do we want the artwork to live post 100 years? You know, I mean, you know, there's a way for history. I mean, most of our artists learned about Picasso and everything in the Arab world, never seeing a Picasso in the books. Yani, there's a point where art history also becomes from the material and living for a long material life, but there's a point where it can also wither and die. So there's that vocabulary that also, and again, I fear from, the only thing I fear, even in museological terms, is that I want to say, okay, and this is not to say being anti the collection, but I want to say that we need to be careful where we don't perpetuate the hegemony. We want to infiltrate the narrative to arrive at a certain level of equilibrium and equality. I know this, it's idealistic, but it's necessary. You know? Like, how do we change even museological terms to be all about ephemerality after we come to an equilibrium? How do we all become part of an equation to think people, not objects? What I love about the Palestinian Museum is that it's not a space for collections. And many other institutions in the world are not that, but it's also these gardens, you know? It means it's also right adjacent to Birzeit University. So there's a university right next to the museum. So I always tell them, I want all the lovebirds to come to the gardens. You know, I want them to be the ones that roam around. I want to capture those, just to live in the space. So it's an important thing. I've worked for long times with people like Decolonizing Architecture, Dar, Sandy, Hilal, and Alessandro, and Superflex. We've known each other. They've come to Palestine Superflex since 2006. I've had long-term relationships with these people. We were talking about, you know, this thing. I'm not invested in the new. Like, oh, hi, I'm a new artist. Look at my portfolio. I'm going to show you tomorrow. No, it doesn't work that way. So I just want to say that we infuse each one's practice with our ideas. And we think about things in a very systematic way. But I really also think that, and I'm not saying this lightly, I think now there's a real critical role for art and artistic practice to think about change in a tangible way. No longer thinking about the abstracts. It's not enough to be symbolic. And actually going back to your question, Kevin, I'm not worried about being reactive as much as I'm worried about being symbolic. I don't want symbolism. Khalas. You know? I want I want things to be. I want people to sit and brainstorm and think about tangible ways to make things change. I want that kind of criticality that immediately comes up with tangible ideas and is effective in society. That, for me, is the proper way for decolonization. It's not about just decolonizing the mind. One step further, how is it applied? Forensic architecture, for example, is a great example. Oh, we are. Sorry. See?
So we are really running out of time, and I would like to take up a lot of these comments and also further questions when we have a group discussion.
Sure, you got
because a lot of these things around conservation and your radical position around that, and also the symbolic as a possible threat at this point is really something that we can all discuss and respond to at the conclusion, that is tomorrow, for which there will be much more time. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sorry for running. Thank you.